you're listening to Carpool Theology. We're your hosts. I'm Grace.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Shauna.
And we are on the road to discover who we are in light of who God is. We are going to be joined by friends, leaders, and authors to discuss the intersection of faith and action. And we're going to have a ton of fun while doing it. So grab your coffee. Let's roll.
What's up? What's up?
Hey, everyone.
We are in the car.
Yeah.
We are still traveling.
Typically, as we are.
Where is my Shawnee girl? Oh, here it is.
Oh, yeah.
We are still traveling, and we're excited.
Yeah, Shawnee's not with us today.
Two things, again, that you will not notice in the car today. Two detrimental pieces that are pretty vital to the carpool theology situation. Shauna, wisely, not here.
Not here.
Here in spirit.
Yes.
Here you are.
Here in spirit. Yes. When we miss her so much.
We do miss her so much. She was a big part of writing these episodes, though, and she had a great reason to miss. She was at a retreat, and so really important work she's doing for our recovery community, and we're so proud of her. But
we're not the same, but we carry on.
Yes.
Yes.
So bear with us. Mm-hmm. But also, you do not see the disco ball.
We forgot it.
We forgot the disco ball, which would have, right at this moment, shined glorious light onto our guest's face.
It really would have.
It brings so much joy to the car, and I'm really sad. So two things that bring immense joy to the car are no longer with us right now in this moment.
Yes, we're bummed.
We're bummed. But again, we carry on.
Yeah. So, welcome to the car. Welcome to Carpool Theology. I'm Grace.
And I'm Alex. And we are stoked to be here in happening Rancho Cucamonga. On this fine Sunday morning. I want to say, I do not believe we have ever filmed on a Sunday morning.
No, we haven't.
It's the Lord's Day.
It is. I was going to say, it is the Lord's Day. And He's going to anoint this car and this conversation. Let's go.
That's right. On a Sabbath, here we are.
Here we are.
Doing the Lord's work. So as we've been traveling, we've been staying with our guests, actually. We'll talk about that in a sec, but they have 4 kids. We're in their home. We've been staying in their office, and let me tell you, I feel like I'm in Mexico.
Bro,
my kids are not here.
The first morning we woke up.
What does that mean, though?
What do you mean?
Like in Mexico?
I feel like I'm at an all-inclusive resort.
It. Yes.
I feel like that statement could go 2 ways.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. What you're saying. Let me say this way.
As Christians, you think of Mexico, you're like, we're building a house. And like... sleeping on the floor of an office.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Okay, there you go.
The French Riviera. Don't care.
Got it.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. We woke up Saturday morning, and the first thing, and I mean this in all, we're praising this. I was sleeping on a mat on the ground.
A beautiful mat.
It was amazing. I had no issues.
The pool of Bethsaida, take your mat and be healed.
Yes. But I have to preface where I was. And I literally woke up, and the first thing out of my mouth was like...
It's a Tempur-Pedic mat.
That's right. Look at me over there.
It is absolutely glorious.
Yes.
I am so happy right now because no one is literally rubbing my face saying, Mama hungry.
Mama,
I eat.
Yeah.
And I was by myself on this mat in this quiet room.
It was past 7 a.m.
Grace could have done that for you if you wanted.
Mama, eat. So, I don't know.
That.
I feel like possibly my mom friends on here are going to understand and going to relate that you could be literally on a mat in the ground in someone else's home.
Yes.
And it feels like a supreme vacation.
Yeah. Yes.
It is glorious.
Yes. And yesterday we were shopping in stores, had nowhere to be. We're just moseying our way through TJ Maxx. Who am I?
Literally
I was
an hour and a half.
Just is this podcast an excuse for mom time?
Basically.
Oh, come on. We're editing that out.
Yeah.
How dare you expose us?
Watch me bring it up 5 times.
Watch me.
Welcome to the Mom Time podcast.
Oh gosh, you're putting us in a big fat box.
I'm teasing.
Oh man.
But also,
we love it.
What a benefit.
But yes, that is a perk that we didn't even realize that happened.
Yes.
Randomly, that we had no intention of
You
creating.
don't get paid to do this, but you get some mom time.
That's right. It's amazing. We get good time together.
Dude, time is currency, and
Yep, exactly. We, to the point where we're walking around yesterday, and Alex, I loved it so much. Alex's gal that helps her at the shop, who's amazing, shout out Chloe. I posted that Alex was getting a tattoo, a piercing, who's to say. Something was going on yesterday.
It could have been a tetanus shot.
It could have been a tetanus shot.
My mother-in-law did think I was in urgent care.
Amazing.
She texted me, "Are you okay?
Are you in an urgent care in Mexico right now?
Did you get hurt? Where are you?"
I love it. Sorry. And you got a third piercing on your ear. We're just walking down the street. You're like, let's go in here. Let's see what's happening.
I'm an impulsive, not that this was impulsive, it's something I've been wanting to do. But when I'm on vacation, I kind of have like, yeah, let's just do that.
Yeah.
I'm not on vacation, I'm working. But you know what I mean? When I'm in another city, this is the third time I've done this in my life. So it's kind of maybe a trend in my life.
Yeah, it was fun. Maybe it's just part of who we are as a podcast. Get tattoos when we're gone, get a piercing. Just
very edgy.
Very edgy, us living on the edge.
Yeah.
Well,
what did Chloe say?
Oh, yes. Thank you for pulling me back around. Chloe said, how can someone be so type A and type B all at the same time? Which is the case.
Hi.
Did she say that because it looked like you might be getting hepatitis?
But I love it. Yep, so true.
So yeah.
Who's the large booming male voice in our car today? His name is Cory Fenn.
Hi.
Cory, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on this edgy podcast. Women talking about theology? Women driving?
Oh, shoot.
Does it get any more edgy than this?
No. We're doing it. You know what? And this is where I like to live, right here.
I am dying. This is great.
On the edge.
I am honestly so thankful to be here with you guys, driving around my beautiful city on this Sunday morning.
Amazing.
I did see signs for a yard sale, and it might be worth checking out.
I am very interested.
I think it's that way.
I am significantly
but
interested.
I've never been to a Sunday yard sale. Oh, I just hit my microphone. I've never been to a Sunday yard sale because normally we're at church on Sundays.
Right.
So, is all the good stuff gone? Do they have, a second batch for Sunday? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe those signs were just up from yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're going to show up, and they're going to be like, move on.
Got any extra
Hopefully
donuts?
they have donuts, yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Hey, Cory is a leader. He has his own nonprofit, which we're going to talk a lot about today in the car. But you were my youth pastor when I was in high school.
Crazy to think about?
15 years.
That means we're getting old.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But it has been...
Those were good days.
Those were good days. So we've been, in friendship now for a long time. And honestly, mentorship. You guys have fully guided my husband and I through life. So you married us.
Yeah.
That
was one of my most fun weddings I've ever performed.
Oh.
There's something as a pastor, especially when it's people that you've, shepherded for a season of life, when you see them make a good choice in who they marry and keep God at the center of that. There's something deeply fulfilling in that realm.
That's awesome.
And so that was a good day.
It was a good day. Your
I
kids,
ripped the pants in my suit on that day.
Oh,
yes,
shoot.
you did.
And then a year later had another wedding and forgot that they were ripped.
Oh.
So I sat in the car and was like, I don't think that's supposed to happen.
So a breeze.
There's a breeze. Oh, shoot.
Oh, wow. That's
a
so
good day.
great.
Well, Cory, give us, that was then. This is now.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you do now, who you are, your family.
Yeah. So I have been married to my lovely wife, Katie, for 15 years. We met at summer camp, and she had to convince me that I should date her, except the opposite of that. And so we started dating and got married shortly after and started a family. We got 4 kids, and we've always been what would be, I think, described as a ministry couple, right? I've been in ministry since I was 19. Her mom is a women's pastor. Her father is an elder at their church. And so that's how she was raised. And then she meets me, and I had just a burning passion to tell people about Jesus. And even at 19, this youthful, naive desire to lead in some way spiritually. And so we've done that together forever. And it's crazy. Time is just this weird thing that doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It is a finite resource, and every time I get a new gray hair, I'm reminded of time is just ticking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a little bit about me. Was a pastor for about 15 years, did some camp stuff in there, and then in September of 2021, kind of resigned all of those things and put all my chips on the table and just went full pin towards launching a nonprofit that exists to help younger ministry leaders find health and mentorship as they lead in ministry. Just a big void that I felt like we found the yard sale.
Where is it?
No, wait, go up there one more. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, I felt like that was a big void in my ministry journey. Was like, who's here to help? How can I do this? Oh, that one. Oh, it doesn't look good. We're gonna do the drive-by, aren't we?
We are.
Just a slow.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Look.
Anyways, that's who I am and a little bit of what I do.
It's awesome.
So, as we were debriefing, unpacking this episode and where we really wanted to take it, we want to start with the problem. So, we want you to share with us, can you identify the problem and essentially why that led you to do what you're doing today?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the problem is that how do I articulate this on a Sunday morning? Here's what I would say the problem is. So the problem is not that we have churches. That is a solution. Like that's what Jesus left us upon his ascension, right? He establishes the church. Years later we have Acts 2, Pentecost, like the church is kind of birthed out of that. Incredible, hopeful, tons of promises from Jesus' own mouth that like the gates of hell won't prevail against it. There's just like the church is, in my opinion, even all these years later, the hope of the world is found within the church.
Right.
That's why Jesus left that for us. The problem arises when we put people in positions of influence, which, by my definition, leadership is influence. Leadership is how we steward influence. The problem would be that we put people in positions of spiritual influence with little to no regard for their own sense of well-being, with little to no training of how to do what they've been called and asked to do. Because I think traditionally the seminary model is believed to be the answer. Like people think that in seminary you get all of these different things, but that's obviously simply not the case. Seminary is really good at training young men and women to be, practitioners of God's word. You'll get some counseling, you'll get some languages, you'll do those things, but there's really not a seminary model that helps young people understand their identity, who they are, why they think how they think, what they're bringing to the table, the good, the bad, the ugly, the trauma, the pain, the mental health, all those things. And so then you take someone, you put them into a position of spiritual influence or authority, and then typically it's like, okay, you go do that now. I got to do my job, you go do your job. And what it creates is, one, a ton of pressure on a young leader, and two, it creates a lot of room for things to go bad, for ego to get in the way, for unhealed trauma to start to lead, ego to bubble up. This isn't the case in every context, but it definitely is something that happens often. We hear about moral failures and things going sideways all the time. So
yeah.
The problem in my mind is we give people a ton of spiritual influence with little to no accountability or care to help them handle that influence in the positions of authority that they hold.
Yeah, that's great.
What happened personally for you to make you passionate about that and your own ministry journey?
Yeah, my story is kind of a dicey one. So I was not raised in what we would call like a Christian home. My family would go to the occasional Christmas and Easter, so I wouldn't even call us like Christmas, Easter Christians. We would go occasionally. When I was a kid, parents divorced when I was really young. I actually grew up here, about 2 miles from where we're driving right now. And we should go by my childhood home.
Okay.
Love that.
Next big intersection, hang a right.
Okay.
And so was born here, and my parents were both like very avid drug users. And my dad decided to get clean, and my mom had a harder time with that. And so there came a day where my dad and mom divorced, and my dad was awarded sole custody of us. Now, what's strange about that is in the 90s, that was, and especially in the state of California, that rarely happened.
Yeah.
And so I'm being raised by my dad and my grandmother, and then my father remarried. We moved to Orange County, and so now I have a stepmom. Well, stepmom had a son. I have 2 sisters. Stepmom had a son. And so I'm like, cool, I have a brother. well, a couple years later, my brother tragically died. Still estranged from my biological mother. You can only imagine the kind of pressure and stress that the death of a child would leave someone. And so, like, childhood was honestly really hard. I did not have a positive childhood experience. If you turn left here, I had moments that were positive, and I really love my family, and we've done a lot of work to heal and address some of the things we're talking about. But it was really hard. So fast forward till I'm in my late 20s, and my wife and I were going through the process of adopting a child. And during that process, all of those wounds of young family, like I describe it in a way of like if you had a bucket that had like mud in the bottom and you just let it sit for a while, it's going to get clear and that mud's going to sink to the bottom, right? But the like adult life that I was not prepared for was like someone just shaking that bucket, and all that mud and all that sediment and all of those things just began to rise to the surface. I was having like crippling anxiety, which for your listeners, if you've never dealt with anxiety, it's really almost impossible to describe. And that anxiety would show itself when I was doing things that were more forward facing. So as a pastor, you do a lot of public speaking, you're doing things like announcements or hosting different gatherings. And so it's just like a huge trigger for anxiety to come up and kind of keeps you from being able to do your job. With anxiety, I also was diagnosed with severe depressive disorder. And severe depressive disorder, like we would call it depression. But the severity of it was like I would have like 3 good weeks and 1 week where I'm in full despair, like can't see the future, don't know what's happening. And there's an instance where it came to a head. I was at the church that I was working at the time, and I was just simply doing announcements because I was new. They're trying to kind of prep me to begin teaching, which is something that I love and am very passionate about. And someone, I didn't know who it was because it's a new church and it's a big church, but someone in the crowd who had some sort of disability had like an outburst, like a verbal outburst. And it was natural, like I watched it many times after, but in that moment, not knowing it was coming, the anxiety kind of told me like, see, you're bad at this. Like someone hates what you're saying right now. And it put me into this really awful state of mind. And so I went home and kind of processed with my wife, like the weirdest thing happens. I think I just had a panic attack on stage. Turns out I had a full-blown panic attack on stage. Like felt my throat close up, started sweating profusely, shaking in the knees. And I'm like 6'5", 300 pounds. Like this is like I'm like a rhinoceros basically. So this is a very abnormal thing to be watching happen. And so that instance kind of like really revealed something's really off. But I didn't have the mentorship or the wisdom in my life to point me in the right direction to go do something about it. And so I just sat in it, and it got worse and worse and worse to the point where the summer of 2017, I was full-blown suicidal. And so there's one night where I had just convinced myself that like me dying was the answer to all of these problems. And I didn't know how, I hadn't got to the point where I wrote a letter, but I was definitely in a moment where I'm like convinced like me not being here is best for everybody. My wife could have a happy, healthy husband. My kids could have a dad who's more present because he's not dealing with this severe depressive disorder, so on and so forth. And so I was sitting in my closet at like midnight one night, just contemplating like how would I do this? What would be the quickest, easiest, cleanest way for this to happen? Life goes on. Like you can kind of hear how off my thinking was. Right. When my wife, who's a deep sleeper, comes in and flips the light on in the closet, and she goes, "What are you doing in here?" And it kind of reminds me of the early parts of Genesis after the fall, where Adam and Eve like make clothes for themselves, and then like God shows up, and there's like this great revealing of like, here's this God who made you, who formed and fashioned you, and you're not living how you should be. And so in that moment, I kind of just felt caught, and I just told her everything. And obviously she had some idea, but not the full picture. And she was really kind and caring in that moment. She didn't let her own fears to lead the conversation. She told me 2 things. And I really believe these 2 things completely changed the trajectory of my life. The first thing she said was, "We're going to go get you help." The second thing she said was, "I want you to think about your future. I want you to think about the future of me and our kids. I want you to think about the future of of what God wants to do in and through you. Like, this is by no means the end. And you'll go right up here. And so I resolved in that moment to go get help. I resolved in that moment to like do everything I could to address the issues that were within me. And so for the next 2 years, went through some really intense therapy. And then you'll do left here.
Cool.
Went through really intense therapy. And in doing so, just had a ton of unresolved childhood trauma that came to the surface. And the therapist I was seeing at the time was really good with that specific, type of mental issue. And like kind of went through that and like made up a lot of ground really fast. If you've ever done therapy, you'll know that. Like at the beginning, it's either really hard for people for 6 months and they're questioning if they made the right choice or not with this specific therapist, or it goes really fast. And then there's kind of like a lull after that where you're dealing with some residual stuff. So that was more my case.
Yeah.
So about the time that I felt like I had gotten a lot of health and healing and resolve there, I started going to this like Christian kind of life and leadership coach, but he also had a lot of background as a therapist and a counselor. And so that mixture of like someone who can help refine and define who you are, but also who's aware of like mental health struggles was really beneficial for me.
Yeah.
And so as a ministry leader, I found healing. Like God healed me through that process. And in going through that healing, I realized that there are so many people in ministry with that exact story. And all that it takes is someone willing to step into that with them to help them find health and healing too.
Yeah.
And it was like the lights went on for me where I was like, I think I could do this. I think I could help point people to the right way. Okay, check it out. Yeah, if you go left here, where these people are standing is my childhood home. I grew up in that house. I've actually never driven by and seen people outside.
It's so fun.
I used to wet the bed in there.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
That's crazy, huh?
Hi, everyone. That's funny.
Anyways,
That's cool, Cor.
so the other thing that's kind of like really big in my story, if you go left, it gets pretty cool over here. Okay. This street, by the way, at Christmas time, this is the most intense Christmas light you've ever seen.
Christmas tree lane of Brian Tukuamanga.
It is, and I would say it's like on par with Christmas tree lane. Like it's that crazy.
Oh, I love it. That's so fun.
So the other thing that's really big to my story is like when I graduated high school, I got saved and then joined a gap year program, the Joshua Wilderness Institute up at Hume Lake. And during that process, like grew really fast because I had someone teaching me and showing me and, kind of breaking down the faith for me.
Everybody these days has a podcast, even your girls. Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, even if you're driving around in a car, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best to get them talking. We have one right now. You can go fill out a poll when you go on Spotify for Carpool Theology. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. We've been using Spotify Podcasters from the beginning over here at Carpool Theology, and we highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
The other thing that year did for me is it made me fall in love with programmatic discipleship, meaning there's a pattern and a process to help people grow spiritually. I fell in love with it and always wanted to do that. And so about January of 2020, I was like kind of working with people and like was people asking for advice, whatever, as you get older in ministry, everyone's trying to figure this thing out. And someone, just reaches out with a question or whatever. I started taking some of those people through a process that eventually, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, I had even more time. And so I started organizing that process and used those words that my wife spoke to me that night in the closet, so to speak, as a bit of a mantra or a bit of like a motivation
Hmm.
to help other people think forward and to help other people think about their future. And so through all of that, Onward was born. And Onward has become a platform where we
Yeah.
help young ministry leaders like envision their future through the skills and where they are today and go, how can we use this long term?
Mm.
Because 90% of people who start in ministry don't finish. So
Wow.
the average,
That's a big stat.
it's a huge stat. The average like ministry leader, only 1 out of 10 is going to actually have a career for life in ministry. And there's a million reasons. It's like not all bad, right? Like
Hmm.
life changes, things change. But I think we also have all heard stories of how that does go bad.
Right.
And so that's who I just have a heart for.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that part of your story. I know that's not easy to bring up,
Yeah.
and I just hope for our listeners too, you just hear that vulnerability, and but you, as you shared, you've done the hard work
Yeah.
with a therapist and like with mental health professionals to be at a place where you like can confidently share your story and
Yeah.
say the Lord is moving and working in this way,
Yeah.
even in the hardest points.
If any of your listeners have struggles with mental health and the kind of struggle that causes you to not be able to see a future, I hope that my story and like just the bit of it that I shared with you gives you some hope to know like there actually is a future for you. There is hope. There is healing. It's possible.
Yeah.
I remember during that time when I was like kind of in process of healing and like really acquiring a whole new framework mentally to think about life and faith and family and all the things. There were 2 pastors in our area that actually died by suicide.
Wow.
And one of those pastors, I had a good friend who was like an acquaintance. So we were both friends with this family who had lost their husband to suicide. And they came over for a Super Bowl party while I'm in therapy, right? Like while I'm in therapy for the thing that ultimately took the life of this husband and father, I'm in therapy for that. And their family is at my house. So I'm watching their children play with my children. I'm watching his widowed wife interact with my wife. And I just had this like emotional, what could have been had I not found healing, like picture.
Yeah.
Like I was convinced that my family, that this was a good state of mind for them. And it was just this like sobering experience to keep motivated and to find the health and to find the healing.
Yeah.
And to engage along the way.
Yeah.
This next question we have, so what would you say it looks like to lead in such a way that ministry comes out of an overflow of living your life, as opposed to circumventing your life around your vocation?
That's a really, 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 really good question. I think that's a question that like should be asked in interviews of interns when they're just starting in ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because ministry ought to be an overflow. And a lot of times it's not. A lot of times ministry is a performance or an identity that people put on.
Yeah.
And it's not an overflow. So I think there are rhythms and habits that God gives us in his word that if we pay attention to and engage in those, it's like turning up the volume of God's voice in our life, right? So how often do we feel or think or hear others say, like, I just wish I could hear God? I think sometimes in the culture that we live in today, like this post-Christian culture, where everyone, whether Christian or not, is aware of the Bible, I think sometimes we, even as followers of Jesus, forget that spending time in Scripture is literally turning up the volume of God's voice in your life.
That's good.
And so we'll say things like, I just want to hear from God. Well, you can.
Yeah.
You can.
Yes.
If you're diligent and faithful to spend time in the Word.
Yeah.
And so that is where it has to start. I'm a firm believer, and that's where it has to start. Like it has to start with us actively engaging in the spiritual disciplines. Like those have to become a way of life for us. I think from there, we have to have a resolve to serve people. Far too often in today's ministry culture, there's like this culture of hype, of like hype man for Jesus kind of feeling, which is like 10 miles wide and just barely skin deep because the language sounds right, but there's no depth to it.
Hey y'all, this conversation is getting good, and we hope you're loving it. When you engage with what we do, it helps us bring even more amazing guests and topics into the car. So get involved. Your support means everything to us. Continued prayer, leaving us a review, answering our poll questions, or subscribing to the pod all add up in a huge way. We are so grateful to get to do this. Consider supporting us in a financial way through a monthly donation. Stick with us and find out more at the end of this episode of how you can get involved. Let's keep it rolling.
Okay, so here's like a little bit of a tangent.
Yes.
Here's a little bit of a tangent of how I think we've gotten to the place where we are in evangelical culture today. My perspective, just one man's opinion, take it or leave it, right?
Yes.
So as best as I can tell, in the 1940s, as we came out of World War II, churches started to grow. And that's really where we saw or began to see the emergence of what would be called the megachurch movement.
Yeah.
Megachurch is defined by a church that has more than 2,000 people. In American culture, things that are big are oftentimes identified as successful, right? Like a big church is a successful church. And so we started to see churches, and these were oftentimes like heavy denominational churches start to, like Baptist, Presbyterians, start to grow really big. And it makes sense in a post-wartime world why people would be hungry for God, right?
Right.
Well, America being like the beautiful country, I love this country, but consumerism is in our ethos as Americans. Like it is what built society. Obviously, capitalism is attached to that. And I'm not one of those people that thinks that capitalism is all bad or consumerism is all bad. I think it just has to have its place. And it has to have healthy checks and balances. So when you introduce that like kind of American way of thinking into something that is deeply intimate and deeply spiritual, we now have what would be called like the seeker-friendly or attractional movement of church, where like a successful church is defined as being large. Well, how do churches grow large? They share the gospel. And so what used to be a pastor that would take medicine to you when you were sick or food to you when you were hungry or would marry you, would bury you, like was there to oversee the spiritual care in your life, has now turned into a come to me and I will tell you what God's word says to you. So like a pastor, biblically defined as a shepherd, used to mean something that in today's terms, it really doesn't mean anymore. Right. Because pastors are really known as like good public speakers or good leaders. But like really everything up to the 19th century, a pastor would have been someone, it's hard to stereotype, it's hard to lump them all together. But like a pastor was defined as someone who's like, if you needed something, they're going to come and care for you. You know, if your husband left you or your husband suddenly died, the pastor's going to be the person there who's going to bring hope and light through God's word to you, as well as helping to fulfill tangible needs that you needed. Well, today it's just not really the case because today, like, we have young pastors who are really hungry for influence and platform and really want to grow as public speakers. But when it comes to serving others and shepherding others and discipling others, that's really becoming a lost art in our culture.
I think it's also served up kind of like as a secondary issue. Like,
which part?
The part of you'll serve other people. Like, yes, like let's hone in on your craft and like let's teach you how to teach or not even, you have this talent and this gift. But the ability to, marry, bury, be with someone in the hospital, go to someone's home, that's not part of like the job it's not served up as part of the way to get you there. That's not part of the benefit.
Just so backwards, right? If you like, we just got through studying Sermon on the Mount, talking about the backwards kingdom, upside down kingdom, and it's just so backwards, right? That's just not in the design of what truly matters.
Well, and you'll hear people say like leaders are servants. That's what a good leader is. Right. And I think there's a couple terms like that in today's Christian culture where it's like, do you know what that means though? Do you know what that means? Like, do we as ministry leaders, people who hold spiritual influence over others, do we know what it means to truly serve someone? Right. I don't know.
Like define that.
When you've experienced someone serving you, you know what that feels like. If you've served someone and seen their life changed and transformed through serving someone, you know what that feels like. Without that experience and without understanding what that looks like, you don't I don't think we understand what servant leadership is.
Hmm.
Like Jesus says that the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Seeking is a progressive, is a like action oriented. Like seeking is you putting action into the thing that you'd like to accomplish. And as ministry leaders, if our primary way that we serve people is by handling the Word of God, I think that there's more that we can do,
Yeah.
not only as individuals but as groups. There's more that we can do to help people, to
Yeah.
serve them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
What would you like? I just heard this and it's been kind of rocking my mind a little bit recently, is like guaranteed places of encounter with God. That regardless of how you feel or what's going on through your mind, God will be there, like with you. And one of those, it's like, the obvious is like, yeah, you open God's word. That's a guaranteed encounter,
We
regardless of
can't
how you
understate
feel.
that enough.
Right.
I think sometimes it's really easy to like think that it's assumed, but in today's culture we can assume nothing.
Right.
The right answer doesn't mean that it's transformed you. Like cultural Christianity and like Christian nationalism is rampant because people would rather be right than transformed.
Right.
And so like knowing the right answer is one thing, but actually living that out is the other.
Yeah. But yeah, so another guaranteed area of encounter would be with the poor. But yes, like poor, like socioeconomically, money-wise, but also poor in spirit. People that are just needy.
Yeah.
But I don't know, when leadership, because we emphasize and talk about the things that would bring people to us, your craft, your teaching, the way that you speak, your charisma, your hype, we miss out on that guaranteed encounter.
Yeah. I think I want to be like really careful to not throw today's society out as bad.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of like good and beautiful things happening. It's just not like, that's not what gets clicks. There are people who do a really good job and like, I'm not like the good days are behind us kind of person.
Right.
But I think you nailed it on the head. It's one thing to serve the poor, and it's another thing to like create a program and hire a leader that serves the poor so that your organization can check a box and say that we serve the poor. This is like another one of those things that I go, this is the issue. There's individual responsibility, and then there's like corporate or communal responsibility. And sometimes as ministry leaders, we err on the side of corporate or communal responsibility, and we take that as I'm doing my part. Look how much is happening as a result of my leadership. But if that's where you're at, then you have now lost out on an opportunity for transformation and deeper revelation in terms of intimacy with God, because personally you're not experiencing those things. So I think like we have to be really careful, and like we have to be really specific with terms. Like, the word says that true religion is like loving orphans and widows. So who are the orphans and who are the widows in your life that you're loving? Actually, like the Old Testament has really specific ways that you are to care. And Paul writes this too in some of his letters to the New Testament churches. Like there's really specific ways that you're supposed to care for widows. This is like a newish thing in the last 3 to 5 years for me that I've like read and started understanding. Like that's crazy. The church had specifics on how they're supposed to deal with widows. So that tells us that like, yes, there's a corporate responsibility as a church. And like when, when you die at 40, like in the New Testament times, like, yeah, we probably should talk about widows. Today, death is so tragic because it's largely removed from our culture. You die, you get put in a bag and then a box and then you're buried. But in that day, I mean, imagine where your corpse would go when you died. Like it's, like in India today, the bodies float down the river through the middle of town. You can't escape death as a reality. Today, we've really tried to remove death as a reality. When we remove things like that from our culture, we don't have place for the spiritual context when God's word brings it up. So widows, that's a big deal. Orphans, again, death is going to happen. Where do those kids go? Like when I believe it's in the book of James when it says that like true religion is caring for orphans and widows. There is a corporate communal responsibility in that. I think there's also an individual responsibility in that.
Right.
And those two things can exist at the same time and should.
Absolutely. I Okay, so let's talk about the mixed bag of the disciples, because I think I love how much you're tying into this. Yeah, like essentially our guidepost here
Mm-hmm.
in the Bible and Scripture. Talk about the mixed bag of disciples. What can we learn from the heroes of the faith about leadership?
I've always been a huge fan of the Gospel of Mark and how it kind of tells the story of the disciples. If I'm not mistaken, I think Mark was, no, it was Matthew, I believe, that was the first gospel written. But Mark takes like a really different approach than Matthew, Luke, and John do. Each are obviously different, but Mark has this really cool moment. In Mark chapter 3, after John the Baptist is beheaded, I believe, Jesus calls the disciples to himself. And he does it in this way. He says, he went up to the mountain to pray and to call those to himself. And he called them that they might be with him, that he might send them out to preach, and that they may drive out demons. So Jesus calls the disciples, according to Mark, for those three purposes. One, that they might be with him. This is Matthew 1, Emmanuel. He will come to you. I think it's like Matthew 1:26. He will come and he will be Emmanuel, which means God with us. You know, I love Christmas time, like, oh come, right? That's where that comes from. So as disciples of Jesus, like, we have an opportunity to be with God, which, that's also one of his names, Emmanuel, God with us, that he might send them out to preach. Very obvious, like, understanding there, right? Like, we have Great Commission, we have Acts, the book of Acts. We have like these commissioning moments throughout the New Testament. Like, we are made to proclaim the good news of Jesus in a world that is dead and dying. I believe that to my core.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The third one's really weird. That they might drive out demons. And it's only weird to me in 2023 that, like, I don't see demons. You know, I'm not in that, like, it's not a, like, it feels like kind of Ghostbustery to me. You know what I mean? Like, how often do we deal with demons? That's interesting.
Right.
Because so much of Jesus's ministry is marked by dealing with demons, right?
Yeah.
So where's the disconnection? I don't know. Someone smarter than me who understands this stuff better than me could tell me. But what I do know is that we live in a world that is dark, and that Jesus compares his place in our life as light that should be put on a stand. That Ephesians also talks about that there's like a very real enemy, that we're fighting a war that's not flesh and blood, but it's spiritual. So Jesus called his disciples that they would be with him, that they might go proclaim the good news, and that they might destroy the works of the devil. So then you look a little bit beneath the surface. Who were these guys? These were tax collectors. These were fishermen. These were average, everyday Joes who likely had tried to become disciples, but had failed in that attempt. So they took on a vocation. So these guys had a job because the dream of being a disciple was like already long gone. Like, it didn't happen. Like, Talmudim did not happen for them. The rabbinic culture did not happen for them. Like, they weren't a part of that. And so then Jesus comes and he like redefines what their purpose is going to be for those years that they walked with him. But then remember, after Good Friday, what do? They go back to doing what they did before Jesus.
Yeah.
Like in John, when Jesus appears to Peter, they're fishing.
Right.
Like,
Yes. They go back to fishing.
Yeah. I find that so interesting.
Yes.
So when the question is like, what about the mixed bag of disciples? What can we learn from them? I think we can learn from the time they spent with Jesus. I think we can learn about their approach and how they proclaimed the good news. We mostly see that through their writings, and then the timeline that Luke gives us through the book of Acts. And then the third piece is we see them actively destroying the works of the devil, the darkness that's in the world. But what I love is that each of them did it in their own way. Each of them did it with like what they had and who they were made to be.
Yeah, that's good.
How they were crafted, like what their life experience was. Like, you know, each of them did it in their own way. And we see that through the way that they write. And the way that they recall the others' experiences.
Yeah.
And something I love, like, in studying their lives is their oneness with Christ. As a foundation, like, right? Like, I mean, we can go off and do all these things in our own strength, in our own, like, accord. I speak from someone who, like, battles with that fleshly desire to, like, be the God of my life. We can do all that and lead probably earth from the outside looking in well.
Yeah.
But that oneness and that closeness and that that draw near to me mentality is really that, like, it's a foundational piece that that quote unquote made them successful in the kingdom.
Sure.
And I think that's super important, right? To like be any kind of leader. But yeah, I really love that. That's really great.
I think it's interesting too. Like, no, the disciples were never other than obviously Judas, never disqualified. Like,
right.
Peter was a mess. You know, we use Peter a lot, but he's a mess. But
yeah, Peter's the most relatable disciple by far.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were young. We know that they were young. They were young in ministry. They were young following Jesus. They were all over the place emotionally. But Jesus never disqualified them. Right. And we see that, I don't know, like, what can we learn from that, like, today as young leaders, like, and people in ministry? Like, what's the hope there?
I think there's two things. One, when we talk about, like, in ministry, we have to be careful that we are clear with as a vocation,
sure,
right?
Yes.
So, like, the reason the disciples didn't disqualify themselves is because it was a way of life for them, not a paycheck.
Yeah.
Right? Paul is
That's
making
good.
tents. The disciples had, like, roles. Some of them became pastors and helped plant churches, but, like, they had jobs also, right?
Yes,
so
that's
there's
good.
that piece. The second piece to remember is that if that movement happened today, our culture would have disqualified them. Yeah. And so sometimes when we read through these people that we would say are heroes of the faith, you have to remember that in those early day terms, these guys were wild and edgy and raw and real. You know, we could use all the obvious examples we hear in church. David's affair and murder, Peter's denial, all these things, right? It should give us as individuals who are in ministry in the sense that we're walking with God and want to introduce more people to him, it should give us great hope that, like, if your life is a mess, God can and will continue to use you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think simultaneously, if you're someone serving in ministry, holding positions of spiritual influence, and your life is an unkept mess, we probably want to be careful with that. And we likely want to... we likely do want to hold someone to a standard. So, like, there's, like, some really notable pastors who have fallen from grace in the last few years, who are now, like, getting hired and taking jobs at churches again, right? No need to name names.
Sure.
But we understand that scenario. And on one side, you have people saying, this is awful, this is bad. On the other side, you have people saying, it's just so great that God has restored them. Peter's restoration was a personal restoration. When a pastor falls, I think the restoration that we need to be careful of is a restoration into ministry as opposed to a restoration back into a right relationship with God.
Yeah.
Like, when we sin, we want to be back restored with God.
Yeah.
That's the goal and the hope in those moments. So the disciples are they're so fascinating. Yeah. But I love that in their writings we can see how human they are.
Yeah.
Because as humans, like, we're all trying to figure this thing out. And we have to lean on one another and the scriptures and, you know, good spiritual mothers and fathers and pastors and shepherds and all these things to, like, get to the bottom of what's what.
Totally.
That kind of creates room for another rabbit trail if you want it.
Please.
So let me try and find my thought here, because it's going to be a weird one. Okay.
We're happy to do it.
Love a weird one.
Yep, we love a weird one.
I think I lost it. It was so close. We're talking about the need for... All right, here's how it goes, okay? Here's like where my mind thinks about today, like, young people trying to figure out faith and discipleship. It's going to be really hard today versus 20 years ago because we officially live in a world where truth is subjective, right?
Absolutely.
So my truth, my story, my experience is now what's going to lead the way. That creates a really difficult place to have spiritual authority in your life, because if the safety net is always, I know what's best and I know what's best for me, there's really not room in your life for someone to bring what would be the objective truth of God's word and the way that he calls and invites us to live life on this side of eternity. There's no room for that if you are in charge of your own life. So like when you were in my youth group all those years ago, which is still so crazy to me. One, I can't believe I was ever a youth pastor. I was ever a youth pastor. Two, I can't believe enough time has passed where we get to do this
I
awesome,
know.
like
It's the
awesome
best.
thing that you guys are creating. It's like weird, and now I have gray hair. Um,
So good.
but like one of the verses that has always kind of marked and defined my approach to ministry is Luke 9:23. Uh, Jesus in Caesarea Philippi kind of looks at this crowd of people and he says, if anyone would come after me, let them deny themselves and pick up their cross daily to follow me. If you were to look at like the original language and how that's strung together, it's literally you have to say no to the Lord that is I and be crucified if you want to be one of Jesus's followers. So this like my truth world that we live in really is in direct opposition to the way that Jesus calls us to walk with him in obedience.
Right.
Because he says, well, your truth is no more. Now I get to be truth for you.
Right.
I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody gets to the Father except through me.
Right.
And so there's deep tension there.
What would you say that the danger is in one actively living that out within, whether they're in a ministry leadership role or not? Like, what does that produce? I mean, I know, but I'd love you to expound on it for our listeners. And
yeah, I mean, we're gonna get a little spicy here, but I think what it creates is incredibly self-centered Christians, which those two things cannot be like paired together. A self-centered Christian. Now, it's one thing to struggle with sin, like Paul, all of Romans 7, right? We hear about his struggle. I do not do the thing I want to do, the thing I want to do, I don't do. Right? Like we could hear him wrestling with the flesh in that moment. I'm not saying there's no room for wrestling, because much of the Christian faith is just a really long wrestling match. It's tiring, it's exhausting. That's why Paul says fight the good fight or run your race, like endurance matters. But I think when we succumb to the way that our world is today, where I am what's most important and my truth and my identity and my reality is what I want it to be, and then I'm going to apply a Christian lens to that, it just creates an incredibly self-centered, self-serving subculture within Christianity that confuses the heck out of everybody.
Yes. Yes.
And oftentimes is not marked by service. You see, like, I mean, I don't want to be too like broad or generalize it, but yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to spot when you have a lens for truth, right? And I think that's generally what our goal is as we're in Scripture, we're growing closer to the Lord. It's to identify those wolves among sheep. And I've noticed, you generally see within those Christians, and I don't mean it to like it's not a life marked with service of true love for neighbor. And I think that's an identifier that we, as people who might be trying to discern those wolves from sheep within leadership, within people in our lives, like what are those markers and of unhealth within their walk with Christ? And I think that's really hard for some people to discern. So I love your perspective there. Like, that's just making me think of that. And
you have to remember, like, Christianity is a faith that is founded upon self-sacrifice, literally.
Right.
And then the invitation into that faith is self-sacrifice.
Yes.
And so when your faith becomes self-serving, and again, I'll use that language from earlier, like individually, if my faith is self-serving, or corporately, communally, at church, our faith is self-serving.
Yeah.
How is that the message of Jesus?
Yeah.
It's quite literally, like Philippians says, like he didn't count equality with man a thing to be grasped, so he vacates the throne in heaven to come down and be one of us. Like, it's self-sacrifice. And then the denial of self and bearing of one's cross is an invitation for me to sacrifice myself so that I can be with and walk with Jesus. So the like self-serving faith is, I can't help but wonder, is that even faith at all? And if it looks good and sounds good, okay, but like what is it really? Like, if we did an autopsy, what really is going on in there? We have to do that in our own hearts, is the point.
And isn't that Jesus's all of his ministry is like getting under the surface
Yeah.
or exposing what's under the surface? Like he loved to do that, not because
Yeah.
of like the joy that came from, like, oh, I see that you're a whitewashed tomb,
Yeah.
but because he genuinely cares about what's on our insides.
Yeah.
Um,
I have to point this out. Right there is a restaurant called Mr. Dumpling,
it's so
and
good.
it is the best soup dumplings you've ever had in your entire life.
Really?
Oh my gosh, it's so
Really?
good. And it's like
Shoot.
$6 a tray.
Stop.
Yeah, you could get real fat and happy in there for about $20.
Really?
And then you're just thirsty all day because there's got to be so much like
Sodium.
MSG and salt and everything.
Dude, we had ramen yesterday in Pasadena. Like,
Spicy tonkatsu ramen is the best ramen.
that's
The
exactly what
best
happened
ramen
yesterday.
in the
That's exactly what
world.
happened yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
It was delicious.
Don't start talking about it. Let's stop it. Get out of here.
Okay, softball us up.
I think we've covered mostly. The rest was about Onward, but he's really touched on Onward. I think the only thing I want to hear, last little thing before we do, we're starting this new thing where we ask a question from our listeners that they've teed up for us, and so we're gonna do that. But I'm gonna do this really
And then
quick.
our last two
Love it.
questions. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But really quickly, how do you hope you've already really talked about Onward, who it's for, what you've laid out the passion of why you guys are doing it. But what's your hope for Onward and how it influences the church specifically?
Oh, Onward. I love Onward so much.
Aw.
It's like it's just this really beautiful thing that God's given me to redeem the really hopeless, broken parts of my leadership ministry journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I get a little emotional thinking about that because it's crazy. Like that's what God does. He
Yes.
redeems things. He takes pain, and we get beauty from ashes.
Yes.
Come
And
on.
so this like little ministry, this little like super niche ministry is an example of that, and it's like crazy. It's really crazy to me. What I hope Onward does for people is I hope that it serves the anxious, scared, in over their head young ministry leader.
Yeah.
And I hope that it gives them the confidence that my wife gave me on that day when I was convinced that suicide was the way out. And she said, think about the future. I hope Onward is able to do that, regardless of how hard and heavy life and ministry is. It's everyone's experience is not as brutal as mine. And there are certainly people who have had it even more tough. But all of us who serve in ministry know this. It's really difficult.
Yes.
And I hope that Onward could be a platform where people feel hopeful about the future because they have someone there to care for them, to listen to them, to be available, to laugh with, to cry with, to hang out with, to make friends. Like one of the cool benefits of Onward is the network that comes out of it is so
Yeah.
stinking awesome to
Yeah.
watch. And I didn't actually have that in mind as we designed this ministry. But watching how these guys now like teach at each other's youth camps and hang out outside of the cohort stuff. And it is like the coolest part to me is watching those connections get made. Because when you know that someone else is having a really hard but similar experience, there's a bond that's formed in that.
Yeah.
And now you have someone that you can lean on and talk to and call when you know things get tough.
Yeah. Just a clarifying question. Onward is for men and women?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Onward is at this stage for young ministry leaders,
Cool.
male and female.
So nice.
And yeah, that's who we serve. In the future, there's some other things that we'll begin to do, but serving young ministry leaders is always going to be at like the core of what Onward is. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to take it to the gram. And we're going
The
to
gram.
ask a quick question we do a little question box in our stories, something I'm hoping to start every time we introduce a new topic, a new guest. And yeah, so this one's from a listener, and I love this.
Hi,
It says,
listener.
Hi, listener X.
Long-time listener,
Long
first-time
time-
caller.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
I love it.
Please.
All right, so how do I lead well and yet also be authentic in my struggles and flesh?
I think you do exactly that. Authenticity is what makes faith real for people. We just had a whole conversation around the disciples and how relatable they are because the account of them was an authentic account, right? But also, we don't really know what Paul was struggling with in Romans 7.
Yeah.
And that speaks to transparency, right? So like if I'm someone who is like, it's one thing to be authentic, it's another thing to be uncomfortably transparent.
That's good.
If you have a disqualifying sin issue and you're serving in ministry, there are people who ought to know that.
Yeah.
But if you like struggle with sin, and I say struggle because you're actively struggling with it, I don't know that everyone needs to know everything, if that makes sense. I think like emotional intelligence, a little bit of emotional intelligence and self-awareness goes an incredibly long way.
Yes.
I say that
Yes.
weekly. A
Yeah.
little bit of self-awareness goes a long way.
Yes.
And so I think it's like, of course we're going to struggle, like absolutely. And I think being authentic with that struggle is what makes the expression of your leadership real and relatable for people.
Right.
But I also don't know that you necessarily want your identity and persona to be wrapped up as the person who struggles all the time.
Right.
Because if you're struggling all the time, are there victories? Are there times where you experience freedom and healing and transformation? People should also hear about that
Yeah.
in an authentic way, a
Yeah.
vulnerable way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, like that whole topic, a little bit of self-awareness goes a really long way.
I love that.
If you come across as perfect all the time, well, now you're not relatable because I ain't perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm the
Right.
first to admit that.
Yes.
If you only ever talk about how hard and difficult and painful things are, now we've got an Eeyore on our hands. And where's the good? Where's the joy?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
the Bible talks about seasons in terms of the spiritual life. Like, when is the sun coming up? When is the snow melting? When is the springtime coming? So
Yeah.
let's hear about all that.
And I think like so much of this too, like sometimes I hate talking about this, but our egos are so like controlling over our ability to let God do his work. And we hold so tight to this reality, this perception that we feel if we are vulnerable with our struggles in leadership, that it somehow diminishes God's power within that. We're limiting, like we're limiting his power in us. And it is, I think it's so rooted in that
Preservation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about that often. And if we really dig down deep into why we would feel this desire to not be transparent, not transparent, but what was the other, the other word?
Yeah.
Yeah, just not being
Vulnerable,
vulnerable with our struggles. It just, it really limits that. So
It goes back to that, like, if like we live in a selfish culture.
Right.
Jesus provides for us a way, again, as individuals and as people who are part of community, to live selflessly.
Yeah.
And so we have to be aware that like self always wants to come out and
Yeah.
I'm here, feed me, I'm here, listen to me, I'm
Yeah.
here, I have good ideas.
Yeah.
And it's like, woo.
Oof.
And I think like to the leader who might be, if this person's a leader asking this question, I would like challenge each of us to think like, how many times have you heard someone share a struggle? Heard them share a sin struggle with the flesh that they're battling and felt seen. And you're like, yes, wow, someone else like also struggles with X, Y, and Z. And wow, they're still pursuing Christ. They might be in leadership or how much closer does that make you feel to hope? And so when we're thinking here, like, oh, I can't possibly share how I am struggling because I'm supposed to be a leader. Think about like who you might have experienced, like someone's story you might have experienced that made you feel closer to Jesus and hope.
Yeah.
And that's our responsibility too. Like we are, we're not perfect. And again, we talked about all these disciples, like,
yeah, the body has many members.
many.
Yeah, and we work together for the good of his glory.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
Yay.
Okay, we have
2 fun questions.
Yeah, 2 fun questions. So, and it can be silly or serious how you answer this first one. It's a little punny, we admit. But what is fueling your tank right now, Cory Fenn?
That's a good one. What's filling me up?
Feeling you up.
What's filling me up? I would say, man, good question, and I knew that you were going to ask that. Side note: if you just go straight for a minute, and we'll go by a really good coffee shop.
Oh, great.
Okay, the question
We need
is,
to
what
stop.
is filling me up right now? A couple things. One, the season of life that my family and I are just entering into is really good and hopeful. The last 5 years have been hard.
Right.
Death, divorce, really deep relationship kind of falling out.
Yeah.
Really like run and gun kind of season of ministry.
Yeah.
And then as that wrapped up, launching a business. This is not for the faint of heart.
No.
I really underestimated how difficult this process would be. But today, like I'm talking in the last month, my wife and I keep going, it feels like the sun's coming out.
Oh, good.
Feels like we're getting there.
Oh,
That makes me weepy.
Yeah,
same.
so just life itself right now has been like we're in a good spot, you know.
Yes.
The other thing is I started working from home like most of the world in March of 2020 and never went back. So I haven't, like, I work from home still 3 years later. I have always been like a family guy. I feel like the greatest contribution I could put out into the world is being a good dad and a good husband and the effects that will have on my family, right?
Yeah.
Right on.
And so like having this time for 3 years while my kids are growing up, and like my oldest, I call him Buddy, like he starts high school next year, and I got all this time with him.
Yeah.
Like all of middle school, I got to be there.
It's amazing.
For all of it.
Yeah.
And so that has deeply filled me up.
Ugh.
From there, I love to cook. And so I love trying out new food
we reap
and
the
like
benefits.
putting weird spins on things. I love to do that. If you turn in here.
We
Cilantro
have
chimichurri
reaped.
changed my
Oh,
life.
you got to add
Yeah.
lime to it. That was the
Yes,
kicker.
our lives have been forever changed by
Yeah.
the tri-tip.
Yeah, that was a good one. I
Cor-
did knock that one out of the park.
You did knock that one out of the park. Cory, thank you so much. I can't honestly like speak enough about it. Just how, I mean, you guys know how much you and Katie have changed my life, but also like, what Onward's doing too. Like my husband's reaped the benefits of that as well. Like if you are a ministry leader, like please check out Onward. We're going to link it in our show notes. We'll link it on Instagram, all of the things. You guys, we'll put the website there. You can apply for a cohort, right?
Yeah, well, we've got 2 a year. So whenever you listen to this, there's one coming up.
Yes. Fall and spring? Like in the
typically.
semester? Good. Awesome.
Oh, thank
Cory,
you so much. Yeah, you guys have really, gosh, I'm like, I told my husband, I'm like, be prepared. I'm coming home.
changed.
I am not the same. Oh my gosh, this has been the best weekend. And oh my gosh, just literally like, I've cried so much this weekend thinking like what the beauty of God, right? Then just bringing people and stories into your life. And it's just such a true gift to be able to sit in the car and do this. So
Thank you guys. And I really appreciate you letting me talk for a little while. I hope it was beneficial, and
So good.
I hope this. I hope your listeners get something from this. If nothing else, pursue health and pursue a way of life that takes you out of the center of it. That would be like
let's go.
my closing words. If we just took that whole podcast and it was just that, it would be the same.
Yes.
So
I love
good.
that.
Love you, carpooligans. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Carpool Theology. We hope this episode was encouraging, fun, and challenging for you as you walk with Jesus and your community. If you loved what you heard today, we invite you to join our genius team of monthly supporters. For as little as $3 to $5 a month, you can support Carpool Theology. We are committed to bringing authentic, honest, side-by-side conversations about faith in a fun setting like a drive around town. Click the link in our show notes or on our Instagram page at carpool-theology to start supporting us today. Thanks, fam. We'll see you in the car.